Natalie, your Monday hostess, and I am very glad to bring you back to another week of Witches the Moon. This week we're going to tackle kind of a tough topic, and it's not exactly witchy, but I've seen it come up in the witchy community, and it was recommended by a viewer, so we're going to talk about it. That topic is cultural appropriation. What is cultural appropriation? To my understanding and from the definitions I have found, cultural appropriation is when one attempts to take on facets or aspects of a culture that is not inherently theirs, primarily for the purposes of bringing disrespect or dishonor to said culture. So kind of making fun of something. So for example, if somebody dresses up as an Indian at Halloween, a Native American at Halloween, somebody might take that as cultural appropriation. I read a story recently about a little girl who had a formal tea party at her house, and it was a Japanese style tea party, and the little girl is not Japanese, and somebody raked that mother over the coals for allowing her to do that. And what I want to talk about here is I can see where that might be an issue in certain cases. Okay, for example, there was a politician in Norway recently who has really been an enemy to the native Sami populations there in Norway, or what are called the Laplanders. Some people may know that term, but their proper term is Sami, S-A-M-I. And she basically for Halloween dressed up as a Native American, and it was kind of tasteless, really, the way she did it. It was done very disrespectfully. The difference between that and what this little girl and her mother were doing is that this little girl loves and admires Japanese culture. She has a very real respect for the culture and a desire to learn more about it and to take on the aspects of that culture that she admires and emulate them. And to me, that is cultural emulation, which is very different than cultural appropriation. There are people who say if you are not of African descent or Jamaican background or something of that nature, you should not be practicing hoodoo. How dare you do such a thing? Or voodoo. How can you know anything about that? And I don't believe that's true, because I think that there are a lot of resources out there now. If somebody's taken on a persona to forward themselves for profitability, so to speak, and their whole purpose in taking on that persona or characteristics or style of dress or style of speak or style of magic even is to simply make themselves a profit, then I would consider that cultural appropriation. It's not giving due respect to the belief system that you are practicing. Now, if it is somebody who genuinely has an interest in it, has found that this is something that works for them, then why are you even worried about what their practice entails? Okay, so another good example I can give is that I do have Native American blood. My great-grandmother, my mother's grandmother on her father's side, was a full-blood Cherokee. And when I was growing up, I was very interested in Native American culture. My father, who to my knowledge doesn't have any Native American blood, was very active in a Native American dancing group and would do powwows and things like that. He did all of his own beadwork, that kind of thing. And it was because my father had a very deep respect for the Native American cultures that were in the Colorado area where he grew up, because he was a Boy Scout and had learned about that and had studied with some of them and had really taken on that as part of his own culture. So it's a fine line, and to me it more has to do with the approach the person is taking and their purpose for taking this learning or these actions upon themselves. So if it is done with respect and reverence and understanding and out of a genuine interest and respect for the culture that those come from, I don't see a problem with it. I truly don't. To me, that's not cultural appropriation. That's cultural emulation, as I said earlier, where you are trying to emulate. Imitation is the highest and most sincerest form of flattery, they say. So when you are working on learning things, and I think that to people are so hypersensitive about stuff these days that you can't. I'm afraid that we're in danger of taking away our ability to learn from one another. Because in some cases, like myself, I learn by doing. So if I'm reading a book about a hoodoo practice or some other diasporan religion, okay, some form of shamanism, which I am studying right now. I'm in a formal class studying to be initiated into the Mune Kai rites. And those actually have their roots in Incan culture. Now, I have no South American or South American or Hispanic type, and I use the term Hispanic very loosely. My husband is Mexican American, and he hates the term Hispanic because it's a lumping kind of label that President Carter came up with during the 70s to lump all people of Latin American origin into one group, and the cultures are vastly different. So he hates the term Hispanic. He prefers Mexican American, Latin American, or something of that nature. So in any case, Incan, the Munai Kai rites come from the Incan culture. The lady who's teaching the class is Australian. There are a lot of similarities between a lot of the Aboriginal cultures and some of the other religions and other diasporan religions. So it's, I feel that it plays a very important role in our spirituality. I believe that we have something to learn from almost every other culture and religion that's out there. There's something to be gained from each one of them simply because large numbers of people practice this and feel connection in some way. Any way you can connect to deity and to your fellow human being, I think you ought to do it. Now, it needs to be done with respect. You don't want to sit there and take on something that's going to be offensive or act in a way that's going to be offensive and counterproductive to the culture to which you are showing your interest, okay? It should be done with respect and deference. But at the same time, I think we tend to be so butthurt these days about everything that anybody does that we are really putting ourselves at risk for fracturing ourselves more instead of coming together. The world is such a smaller place now than it used to be. And again, I think we have so much that we could learn from one another. So in terms of cultural appropriation in the craft and people practicing things that are not part of their given culture, who gives a hoot? I really don't think it's anybody else's business what your practice is. Don't, as long as you're sincerely interested in learning about that and you're taking on parts of that in your practice and you're going with what works for you and what speaks to you, then I don't think it's anybody else's business what you do. And I think that people that speak out against that and have something nasty to say about it are simply people who are uncomfortable themselves. We have to learn to stop being so worried about offending other people that we don't ask questions and that we don't learn things. And we have to stop being so offended when people do things without asking questions ourselves first about, why did you do this? What was your reason behind this? Let's talk about this. When did we stop talking and communicating with one another and simply just being human beings and being brothers and sisters in this race towards death? Because like it or not, we're all going the same place. So be kind to one another. We have a lot to learn from each other, and don't be so quick to judge others based on your own insecurities or your own likes or dislikes or your own culture or what you perceive to be somebody else's culture, because you just never know. To be frank with you, there is absolutely no pure race out there, and if anybody tries to say there is, they're stupid, okay? We are all so mixed in. Everything has been mixed over hundreds of thousands of years. We all generate from the same source. So please be kind to one another, be understanding, be respectful, certainly. Don't be a jackass. But do what calls to you and don't worry about what other people have to say about it. And that's my spiel on cultural appropriation in the craft. Thank you so much. Y'all have a great afternoon.